Welcome, class, to Political Science 200. This is our last session. We're going to continue to go over social policy, specifically poverty, welfare, and health. Let's all enjoy this last class session together.
Yay!
and after this, have a wonderful summer. Quick note, if you haven't gotten in any assignments, please submit those as quickly as possible. I'm being very lenient with due dates, but please get them in as soon as you reasonably can, because if I get nothing from you, then I have no choice but to enter a 0. But if you get me something, I'm still accepting papers, so get them in. Okay, and make sure you do the assessment. And again, the assessment is worth 10 bonus points. It doesn't matter how well you do on the assessment. Try to do your best because it's important for the university and how we're accredited and that type of thing. But, don't cheat. But get it in as soon as you can. And it's 10 bonus points for doing it. Okay, let's move to the content now. We finished talking about unemployment compensation, right?
Yes.
Yes, and what did you take from that discussion, Natalie?
The definition of unemployed is much more complicated than you think.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Very good. Do all 50 states have unemployment compensation programs?
Yes, they do, because the government helps them out with it.
The government.
The federal government.
There you go. This is a political science course, so we don't just throw around the term the government loosely. The federal government gives incentives to the states to create unemployment compensation programs. So consequently, all 50 states have them, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's continue on and talk about some other government programs. One is Supplemental Security Income. This is called SSI. And this is direct federal cash assistance to the needy, aged, blind, and disabled. Right? What do you suppose political support is like for the SSI? High or low?
High.
High, absolutely. Why?
Because if you aren't funding that, you're kind of not really that good of a person, in my opinion.
Well, there you are, and that's your opinion. You're free to express it, and those are part of your values. And a lot of people in America would agree with you, right? And so the needy, aged, blind, and disabled, if we as a society aren't willing to help those groups, then who are we willing to help, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the time when discussing social welfare policies and people's attitudes and values, sometimes scholars will lump these groups together as what people perceive as the worthy poor, right? So there's high levels of political support for SSI. Next, and we'll discuss this term more later, is temporary assistance to needy families, TANF. TANF is what some people call it as well. I call it TANF just because it's TANF. That's the acronym. But a lot of people say TANF, whatever. Temporary assistance to needy families. And again, we'll talk about it more in just a few minutes. But this is basically federal aid for state programs of cash assistance to poor families. This replaced the AFDC Federal Entitlement Program. AFDC stood for Aid to Families with Dependent Children, right? So, right off the bat, temporary assistance to needy families. What do you suppose is going to be one of the differences between TAMF and Aid to Families with Dependent Children?
It's not temporary.
Okay, there you go, right? So, Aid to Families with Dependent Children was not temporary, right? As long as you kept having dependent children and made below a certain amount of money, then you qualified for cash assistance, right? That's going to change with TAMF. And again, we'll talk about that more in a minute. Next, there are other federal programs and aid. These include food stamps, earned income tax credit, school lunch, housing assistance, job training, energy bill assistance, WIC, which stands for Women, Infants, Children, etc. Okay. Now, this list I drew from a textbook by Thomas Dye. Why do you suppose Dye lists all those programs? Food stamps, earned income tax credit, school lunch, housing assistance, job training, energy bill assistance, WIC, etc.
Because they're all government programs.
Right. And so he's making a point. We have a number of government programs in place to try to help the poor. It's not like we have just one or two, right? Like, there are a number out there. And that's probably good. Again, we're an extremely prosperous society. And a lot of people would make the argument that with our level of affluence, we have a large responsibility to help those who are struggling, right?
Yes.
Because, again, would you rather be who you are right now in 2020, or would you rather be a queen in the 1600s?
Oh. I thought you were going to say queen.
Nope! Queen in the 1600s.
Dang nabbit!
Yeah.
Not fair.
Which would you rather be?
I guess I'd rather be here now.
Well, exactly. I mean, I'm like, modern medicine, pretty safe food supply, life expectancy is much longer, you know. We live in a very affluent, very prosperous society. So a lot of people would make the argument we have an obligation to help the poor in that situation. Let's start talking about some of these specific programs. Food stamps. Now, why do you suppose food stamps are called food stamps? Yeah.
Because you can't get anything else except for food with them.
Okay, now you bring up an interesting point, right? The idea of them is that they have to be used directly for food, right? But in the old days, like before you were born type of a thing, you would get literal stamps. And people would bring a sheet of stamps. They look like postage stamps, almost, but, you know, and then you'd rip off however many and give them to the cashier, right, to pay for your food. Well, does that make it obvious that you are using food stamps to pay for your food?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. See, now states just have swipe cards that look just like credit cards, basically. You know, they look just like credit cards or any other debit card or... Cards, yeah. And they're swiped just like any other. So the people behind you in line don't unless they're making an effort to, unless
what you got there?
Unless they're nosy, exactly. Unless they're nosy, it's really not an issue, right?
Yeah.
But in the old days, when you had to break out the stamps, it was obvious you were using food stamps. Now, what do you think about that? The idea that with food stamps, people knew you were using them. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, as a person, it probably would have bugged me, But
If you had to use them yourself?
yeah, if I had to use it myself.
Yeah.
But as a person right now, I'm like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. But I assume it is.
Well, see, that's the thing is, some people say, people are already struggling.
Yeah.
There's no need to make them feel ashamed.
Yeah.
To be receiving government assistance. Whereas conservatives argue maybe people should feel a little uncomfortable using government programs. It gives them an incentive to get off of them. So liberals and conservatives kind of see that differently.
I see most things differently.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Next, the Earned Income Tax Credit. I am a big fan of the Earned Income Tax Credit, right?
Yeah.
How it works is, say I'm a low-income family, right?
Okay.
And my wife and I go file our joint tax return, right? We're a low-income family. If you qualify for the Earned Income Tax Credit, if you make below a certain amount, then you won't have to pay anything in federal income taxes.
Ooh.
As a matter of fact, you will get money back.
I like that.
Right? Okay, so do most Americans get a refund after they file their federal income taxes?
I think so.
Yeah. Most Americans do, right? And so if you're low income, you get a refund just like everybody else. So there's absolutely no stigma attached to it at all. The thing is, you don't actually pay taxes. You file. You file your tax return, but you'll actually be getting more back than you paid in. Yeah. So it rewards you for playing by the rules, filing a valid tax return, and you receive a refund check with no stigma attached.
Like pass and go.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of nice. School lunch. Now, school lunch is again, it's a program that's designed to help kids get the proper nutrition they need. So, there's going to be a fair amount of public support for that.
Well, there's no nutrition in that food. I'm sorry.
Well,
Maybe you guys haven't been in there in a while. I have. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
And then they'd be like, ew, fruit. And there's like a tray of uneaten apples. And I'm like, are you guys serious? It's called a fruit.
Yeah.
You eat that, It doesn't just come out in the form of an apple Twinkie.
Yeah.
Like,
anyway.
Eat it, people. No one eats their fruit. It's kind of disturbing. They have to put it back on a tray, and then they recycle it the next day, just for it to get put back until it's rotten. That's disturbing.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, based on your income, a lot of people qualify for free or reduced school lunch and breakfast. Now, we don't have time to go into these. Housing assistance, pretty obvious. Job training, obvious. Energy bill assistance, pretty obvious. Don't pay full energy bill. WIC, women, infants, children, that's another nutrition program, for pregnant women. Why do we as a society want to make sure that women get the proper nutrition they need?
Women?
And when they're pregnant.
Oh, when they're pregnant? Well, because we haven't done, a ton of research, with pregnancy. Well, we have, but not on like 10 days because it's kind of unethical. Like, whenever.
But a lot of data has been gathered.
A lot of data has been gathered.
Yes.
So it's very important because that's the next generation. And brain development and like all that other stuff, it's no joke. You have to like pay attention to that kind of stuff.
That's right.
Because, am I allowed to use examples on here? Or?
No one's named. Okay. So if kids don't get the proper nutrition they need, while the mother's pregnant and while they're very young, then does that increase the probability they will become dependent on the state? Yes. If they get proper nutrition while their mother's pregnant and when they are very young, does that increase their future earning potential? Yes. Will we as a society make a lot more money in the long run by making sure that pregnant women and young children receive the nutrition they need?
Yeah. Because it's kind of like the give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, or teach a man to fish and you'll feed him for a lifetime.
Absolutely. It's very much like that. So, all right. Now let's talk about welfare reform. Right? And we're going to have to go back a couple decades for this, when this was a huge issue. Okay. Go back. You weren't even born yet, Natalie.
Wow.
And actually, most of my students, you guys weren't born either. But 1996. Well, actually, let's go back to 1992.
Boy.
Let's go back to 1992. Actually, we gotta go back to 92. Sorry, I realize it makes it even farther. 92, that's like almost 3 decades. Yeah. Anyway, 1992, Bill Clinton was running against Papa Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush.
Papa Bush?
Yeah, Papa Bush, number 41. And Bill Clinton, the Democrat.
Yes, he is a Democrat.
He is a Democrat. He said, if I'm elected president, I will do whatever I can to end welfare as we know it.
Oh.
Right?
Huh.
Okay, so if a Democrat says we need welfare reform, we really need to fundamentally change things.
Yeah.
We need to end welfare as we know it. What does that tell you about how many people are on welfare, how it was viewed?
Well, it must have been viewed very negatively because you can't really go out there and say, I'm taking money from the poor, the disabled.
Okay, yeah.
That's not really going to go over well.
Right.
This is mostly a popularity contest.
Well, exactly, right? And so were there probably some problems with how welfare was being administered?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And who was eligible and for how long they were eligible and that type of thing. So when a Democrat is saying maybe welfare is a little too generous and people are on it too long, it's probably a pretty good sign there's broad agreement on this. Because Republicans are definitely thinking it's too easy to qualify for welfare and people are on it for too long. So, he won in 1992.
But Papa Bush.
I know. So Papa Bush, one-term president. Bill Clinton won. And 96 rolled around, and it's time for his re-election. And now he has to make good on his campaign promise.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, because it was
how it works, buddy.
That's right, and that was one of his big campaign promises, right? Well, something happened that he did not expect. The House of Representatives had been controlled since 1954 by the Democrats.
Oh, that's a long time.
Yeah, it was a long time. And so Clinton was assuming he'd be working with a Democratic House of Representatives when he promised to reform welfare.
Yeah.
Right? Well, then Republicans took control.
Oh,
I know.
Upset of the decade.
Well, it kind of was actually. It was.
The underdog.
Yeah, I know. So the Republicans take control of the House in 1954.
1954.
And Bill Clinton was not expecting that.
Yeah.
And now he has to work with Newt Gingrich, who is Speaker of the House of Representatives, and the Republicans, who were the majority, in order to get welfare reform. Yeah, I know. So he thought he'd be working with Democrats to reform welfare, and now he's got to work with Newt Gingrich. So anyway, Bill Clinton wanted to get reelected, right?
Well, everyone does.
Definitely. Yeah, almost everyone wants to get reelected, but Clinton wanted to get reelected, so he had to make good on his promises, right?
Yes, he did.
Welfare was reformed, right? In 1996, and it's just called welfare reform.
Yeah.
A lot of time. And everyone, broadly, and people know you're talking about what happened in 96. And it gives states TANF federal block grants. States largely decide benefits and eligibility requirements for cash assistance. So right off the bat, is that a victory for Republicans?
Yes.
Yes. Why?
To be honest, I was looking at my video.
Okay, all right. Well, I'll repeat it then. States largely decide benefits and eligibility requirements for cash assistance.
Republicans like the states to have power.
That's right. They like moving decision-making down.
Yeah.
In general, absolutely. And so right off the bat, that's a huge victory for Republicans because now it gives states more discretion.
Yeah.
And they're the ones who decide benefits and eligibility requirements, not the federal government. So right off the bat, that's a victory. Okay, also strings were attached to this federal aid.
What? Strings
Yep,
attached to
strings are
federal aid?
attached, including the following. A 2-year limit on continuing cash benefits and a 5-year lifetime limit.
Ah.
Right. But that's just for cash assistance. You can be eligible for nutrition programs, housing assistance, energy assistance, other types of things. But this is for the cash assistance. Absolutely. So the longest you can go receiving cash assistance is 2 years. Then you have to get a job, right?
Yep.
Then if you get a job and lose it, the longest you can go again is 2 years. Yep. And then you got to get a job. Then say you get a job, lose it. Then the longest you can go now is 1 year because what have you bumped up against?
The 5-year limit.
The 5-year lifetime limit. Absolutely, right? So when Clinton agreed to this, people in his cabinet, especially those that oversaw social welfare programs, things like that, they were furious with him because they thought he was selling out just to get reelected. And so, well, I mean, or is it compromise? I don't know. Is it selling out or is it compromise? But anyway, he had a number of high-profile resignations from his cabinet, especially over this 5-year lifetime limit. This touched a nerve, right? Because a lot of people were like, "You're just gonna, cut off all cash assistance after 5 years total of being unemployed. You're gonna have mass homelessness and people on the streets, that type of thing." But what a lot of people were forgetting was you were still eligible for a lot of other programs,
Yeah.
Right? And so that just didn't happen. You didn't, in 2001, 5 years after this was passed, 2002, you didn't see mass homelessness, right? So that just didn't happen. Now, a lot of people argued one of the reasons that didn't happen was because the economy did so well between 96 and 2001.
Well, yeah.
Right? It was booming, as we saw the other day when we were discussing deficits, right? We were running a surplus in the late 90s.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. So,
surplus?
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 I know. So, anyway, social scientists are still researching the effects of this 5-year lifetime limit, right? So they're still trying to figure out its full impact. Next, a family cap that denies additional cash benefits to women already on welfare who bear more children, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, again, under the old welfare, which Clinton promised to end, aid to families with dependent children. Say a woman had a child out of wedlock.
Yep.
May blow a certain amount of money. Then she received a certain amount of cash assistance, right?
Yeah.
If she had another child out of wedlock, she received more money, right? Okay, now just kind of classic economic theory. If you create a financial incentive to engage in a certain behavior, will you get more of that behavior?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Money is money.
Yeah, and so the argument is made, we shouldn't have any additional financial incentive to have cash or to have a child out of wedlock, right? Even if it's very small, right?
Yeah.
We shouldn't send that message, right? Or create that incentive. Usually when we're in class, I put up an overhead on this, but I'll just describe it to you now. In 1950, 5% of all births were to unmarried women, right? So in other words, 1 out of 20 children was born out of wedlock, right? Then through the 70s and 80s and 90s, it was rising, until 95, about a third, 32% of all children were being born out of wedlock by 95.
Yeah.
Right? So you go from 5% of all kids being born out of wedlock in the 50s to 32% of all children in the U.S. being born out of wedlock by 95.
Yeah.
If you were a legislator, would that concern you?
Well, yeah.
Why?
Well, it's not as stable usually. Most of the time.
Yeah.
And that's not really good to have a bunch of unstable situations where kids are being brought up and schooling, nutrition.
Yeah. So some people disagree on this, right? Yeah. They'll say, hey, family structure should be left up to the individual. If a woman wants to have a child out of wedlock, that's her business, that's her choice. Others will say, well, yeah, but that decision doesn't just affect her. If single moms are more likely to be on welfare, then it affects every taxpayer, right? So that's why Republicans said no additional money for additional children born out of wedlock, right? Yeah. So the out of wedlock birth rate had been climbing since 1950. What do you suppose happened to it after welfare reform was passed in 96? Continued to increase, decreased, or leveled off? Yeah, basically, you're right. Good guess.
Woohoo!
Was that a guess?
That was a guess.
That was a guess. Okay, good. At least you admit it largely leveled off, right? So considering that it was increasing with no end in sight, a lot of people kind of viewed that as a positive thing. Just getting it to level off is a good thing, you know. We flattened the curve, right? on out of wedlock birth rates. So, conservative victory, or yeah, conservatives viewed that as a victory, very much so. Okay. Next, well, actually, let me say one more thing. What do you think affects the out of wedlock birth rate?
I don't know. Income?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Come on, give me ideas.
Religion?
Yeah, probably.
Those are my two good guesses.
Okay. All right. Does pop culture?
Oh yeah.
Influence that? But yeah, is how is the stigma attached to out of wedlock births? Does that affect?
Oh yeah, because in the 50s it was like you are shunned.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Right. So a lot of things affect the out of wedlock birth rate. Correct?
Yes.
Of which, conservatives said maybe government programs and the incentives they create are one of the things that is affecting the out of wedlock birth rate. And that we can control.
Yeah.
We can't control what movies Hollywood produces and the messages they send, Yeah. But we can cap funding if you have additional children out of wedlock. So we did. All right, next conservative victory here. The denial of cash welfare to unwed parents under 18 years of age unless they live with an adult and attend school. Right. So, conservatives were concerned that some young women saw getting pregnant and having a dependent child as a way to get their own place and get out of their parents' house.
Oh.
Well,
I mean, I find it pretty nice living here.
Well, that's good to hear. But do a lot of teenagers dislike living at home?
Yes.
Yes.
and I can see where they're coming from at some point.
Okay, at some point.
You guys need to work on knocking. It'd be much
Whatever.
appreciated.
I always knock.
Well, you do.
Anyway.
Matthew just comes barging in.
Anyway, so the conservatives wanted to eliminate that incentive to get pregnant under 18 and stop living with your parents and get set up on your own.
Yeah.
Right? So they said if you want cash assistance, you're still going to have to live with an adult and still attend school. Yeah. Does not. Yeah. Okay. So were the conservatives kind of playing hardball?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. But liberals in Congress obtained some modifications to the Welfare Reform Act, including the following. First, guarantee states would not reduce federal funding below previous years. Okay. Huh. I never noticed that until I have a difference between my notes and when I put on the overheads. But okay. So follow me on this. This is important.
I'm paying attention.
Right? Just to keep the math simple, say we have 5 million we have around 5 million people here in Alabama.
5 million people in Alabama.
Just to keep the math simple, say we spend $5 million on this federal cash assistance.
Okay.
Right? So how much is that per person?
$1.
$1. Exactly, right? That doesn't mean each person's receiving $1, right? But it just means if you average it out across your population, that's how much we're receiving in funding, is about $1 per person, right? And so liberals said, well, just promise us you won't cut funding. And conservatives said, okay, all right, we won't reduce it. That's fine. But here's the thing. Is our population growing or shrinking? Growing, right? So say you go from 5 million people to 10 million people.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if you have the same $5 million, hey, we didn't cut funding. How much is that per person?
50 cents.
50 cents, exactly. And so that's the thing is conservatives, it's not like they were being deceptive, but they kind of knew population growth was on their side, right? Because if you keep the funding the same, but the population is growing, then what have you just done to funding per person? Cut it. Exactly.
Kind of like inflation. Your salary just remains the same.
Yeah, exactly. Its purchasing power decreases. Yeah. Okay. So next, exemptions from time limits and work requirements for some portion of welfare recipients, right? Is there going to be a certain percentage of the population in a state that just cannot hold down a full-time job?
Yeah.
Yes, right? And so states are allowed to exempt a certain percentage of their caseload, their welfare caseload, from the work requirements. Does that sound fair, compassionate, reasonable?
Reasonable.
Yeah, exactly. Because just some people, either, whether it's mental, physical, social issues or whatever, they're just not going to be able to hold a full-time job. Yeah. So, all right. And, as long as we're on this topic, in all honesty, this is probably going to vary from state to state.
Yeah.
Because you look and, we have a lot of people on disability in the state of Alabama. Do you want to know why we have a lot of people on disability? Well,
I was serious.
I know. I know you were. But no, it's... They have a lot of manual labor jobs.
Oh.
Yeah. And so, how... you're out there in California and you're working for Google,
pretty cushy job.
Pretty cushy job, honestly.
Well,
now, I know Google people, you work hard and you've created all these innovative things and thank you. Wonderful. At the same time, try roofing, buddy.
Someone sounds a little bigger.
Well, I'm just saying. Some of these, when we come up with some of these policies, I'm just kind of like, you gotta be kidding me, right? And so, yeah, in some states, because of the type of industries they have in the state, the type of labor that occurs in the state, there can be lots of reasons why you're gonna have more of a welfare caseload than other states. I can't work with a herniated disc. That's just all there is to it.
How many people can't?
Well, exactly. It is very painful. So anyway, on we go. Next liberal victory, community service alternatives to work requirements. Right? So, are there times when the unemployment rate is very high? Yes.
I believe now is one.
Now is definitely one of those times. But these are unusual times. I mean, these are unusual times. Let's just kind of go back to regular business cycles, right? Mm-hmm. Are there times not let's just not even deal with the pandemic right now and what's going on right now. Let's just talk about regular business cycles. Are there times when unemployment is higher than others?
Yeah.
Yes. And so basically liberals said in those situations, people may want to work, but may not necessarily be able to find work. They should still be able to get assistance. And conservatives said, fine, but just have them do some community service or put forth some type of effort so they won't feel like they're entitled to this money. And that's a huge concern that liberals have with welfare programs is they create a sense of entitlement that because I'm in this situation, I deserve money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my right.
Yeah. Okay. So as you look at the conservative victories, the liberal victories, what do you think overall?
No one will ever be happy.
Well, yeah.
Gonna be mad.
Yeah, I know. Someone's not gonna get entirely what they want, but when you look at it, again, Clinton ran in '92 saying we're going to end welfare as we know it.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, welfare reform did that, right? No more being on it for the rest of your life, right? At least the cash assistance.
Yeah.
And so, while it's not perfect, a lot of people would say it's better than what we had before '96. And also, just so you know, we call welfare reform, but its technical name was the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. I know, PROWORA. But the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act. And again, that's very telling because conservatives were very committed to the idea that people needed to accept more responsibility for what was going on in their own lives. And we should create incentives to go to work, not to stay on welfare.
Work is so hard.
Yeah, I know. Okay, on we go. Couple more things I want to discuss really quickly. And again, usually I show a few charts and graphs on this, but I'll just give you the gist of it while we're here. If you look at who are the poor, if you break it down by race, African Americans and Hispanics experience poverty at much higher rates than whites. Yeah. Right? Okay, now, trick question. You need to be paying attention for this, Nat. Okay?
Okay.
What? Okay, yeah. Because this is a challenging question. Are African Americans and Hispanics at higher risk of living in poverty than whites?
Yes. Yes.
Right? That's one way of putting it. Okay? But keep in mind, African Americans make up about 13% of the U.S. population. Mm-hmm. Right? And so, if you were going to do a documentary on the typical welfare recipient, the most common welfare recipient and you had to pick one.
I had to pick one. Only one
had to
person
pick one.
To follow.
One person to follow. Uh-huh. Right? Case study.
Okay.
Black or white? The most common welfare recipient.
White.
White, absolutely. Why?
Because they're technically more of the population.
Yeah, exactly, right? So even though African Americans and Hispanics experience poverty at higher rates than whites, when you look at who's receiving welfare benefits, actually whites, in terms of numbers, not percentages, are there are more whites on welfare than blacks or Hispanics. Make sense?
Yes, makes sense.
Yeah. One of the reasons I mention this is, I worked in inner city St. Louis for 2 years before I went back and got my PhD. I worked at a high school there, and a gentleman that I worked with there was African American, and he hated the fact that whenever there was like a news report or whatever on welfare fraud or welfare abuse, anything like that, he's like, they always pick a minority, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, the most common welfare recipient's actually Caucasian. So anyway, that's one that you have to be careful about when you're discussing with people.
Yeah.
So, next, age. Those under 18 experience poverty at higher rates than those who are 19 to 65. Yeah, and those who are over 65 experience poverty at the lowest rates.
That's just work.
Well,
like, I can't get a job. Publix is really cracking down on how many 14-year-olds they're hiring.
Yeah. But let's look at this a different way. I know you're thinking, I can't get a job, blah, blah, blah. Well, but the thing is, let's think of this in terms of 2-year-olds and things like that.
Okay.
Dear class, there are reasons why you take political science, even though you're a social work major, is for discussions like these. What is the most defining thing politically about those who are under 18?
We're minors.
Politically,
we can't vote.
You can't vote.
Which is unfair.
Well, there you go.
There are
right?
so many adults out here that have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
Do you know how many there are?
Yes. Not exactly how many. No. I got a good guess. But anyway, go back to the point, which is, this is a concern, right? In a democracy, when those under 18 are experiencing poverty at higher rates than those who are over 65, right? And the overall population. Because those who are under 17 are politically powerless. They can't vote. Right? And so when indicators come back like this, that they're being systematically disadvantaged, that's a problem, right?
Yeah. They're
counting on those who are over 18 to adequately represent their interests, and that's not occurring. Now, again, I'm going to pick on those over 65 now. They experience poverty at lower rates than any other age group, right? And so, again, well, let's view this more positively first. Social Security has, to a certain extent, accomplished what it was supposed to accomplish, right? Which was alleviate poverty among the elderly. But I still have a problem with this because, again, those that are over 65 vote in high percentages. And consequently, who do you think politicians respond to? Citizens or voters?
Voters.
Voters.
They don't care about us. They care about women.
Exactly. And so, I don't know. That's a concern. Now, next, family structure. Married couples experience poverty. Depending on which year you look at, it's around like 5%. While single parent, mother only, they're usually at around like 25%.
Yeah.
And it varies a little year to year. But the point is, family structure has a big impact on poverty, right? So there we go. All right, well, class, it has been a pleasure. I know it has been an unusual end of the semester, but I've been reading your papers. Overall, so far, I've really been impressed. Again, if you haven't turned in an assignment or something, get it in, and we'll finish out this semester well. Take care. Bye-bye.